John Wayne once stormed onto a movie set carrying an actual gun, hunting for a young co-star he'd branded a communist. That actor spent hours crouched inside a closet, waiting for one of the most powerful men in Hollywood to calm down. And believe it or not, that's not even the wildest story on this list. Here's the thing about John Wayne. By the time he got old, he was convinced a small group of actors was single-handedly wrecking the film industry he'd spent his whole life building. And he didn't keep quiet about it. He named names, he picked fights, and in at least one case, he nearly came to blows in front of a room full of celebrities. Today we're counting down 7 people the Duke considered enemies of everything he stood for, starting with the one that stings the most, because it wasn't really an enemy at all. Kirk Douglas. Number 7 on this list is a genuine surprise, because Kirk Douglas wasn't some rival trying to knock Wayne off his throne. The two men were actually close friends and had shared the screen together more than once. But their idea of what acting was supposed to be couldn't have been further apart. Wayne had a simple rule for himself: protect the image, always play the hero. Never let the audience see you as anything less than rock solid. Douglas thought that was a boring way to spend a career. He wanted messy, complicated, broken characters, and in 1956 he took that philosophy to the extreme, playing the tortured painter Vincent van Gogh in a film called Lust for Life. Wayne watched it and was genuinely disturbed. He pulled Douglas aside afterward and basically demanded an explanation. How could a real man agree to play someone so fragile, so unstable? He tossed out a slur while he was at it, one that made it painfully clear just how narrow his definition of masculinity really was. Douglas tried to reason with him, pointing out that it was just acting, that pretending to be broken on screen didn't make you broken in real life. Wayne wasn't having it. To him, this felt like a betrayal from someone he respected. It didn't stop there either. A few years later, Douglas openly hired a screenwriter who'd been blacklisted for suspected communist ties, and then did something even more provocative. He put that writer's real name in the credits of his new epic, Spartacus, helping bring the entire blacklist system crashing down. For a man like Wayne, who'd spent years fighting to keep Hollywood clean of anyone with left-wing sympathies, this was almost unforgivable. And yet, somehow, the friendship survived. The two of them kept writing each other warm, teasing letters for years afterward. It's proof that even Wayne's rigid worldview had a little bit of give in it, at least for the people he actually loved. Dustin Hoffman. Sliding into 6th place is a name that represented everything Wayne feared about the new Hollywood: Dustin Hoffman. To be fair, Wayne's real issue wasn't Hoffman as a person. It was the movie that made him famous, Midnight Cowboy. Released in 1969, this film was raw, uncomfortable, and unapologetically adult, following a small-time hustler and a sickly con man just trying to survive on the streets of New York. It was slapped with the most restrictive rating available at the time. And then, to Wayne's horror, it won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. In a now infamous interview years later, Wayne tore into the film, calling it perverse and disgusting. What made it worse for him was that he was actually up for Best Actor that very same night for True Grit, going head-to-head against Hoffman himself. Wayne won. He finally got his long-overdue Oscar. But even in that triumphant moment, he had to sit there and watch the film he despised most take home the industry's biggest prize. Privately, Wayne admitted Hoffman had real talent. Somehow that made it worse. All that skill, wasted, in his eyes, on exactly the kind of gritty, hopeless storytelling he thought was dragging cinema into the gutter. What really had him furious wasn't just one movie, though. It was a whole system shift. The old rules that had censored Hollywood for decades had just been tossed out, replaced by the rating system we still use today. Wayne saw that as an open door for filth to flood in, and Midnight Cowboy became the symbol of everything he thought had gone wrong. Clint Eastwood, landing at number 5, is the man who came riding in to take Wayne's crown. Clint Eastwood, the new face of the Western. For Wayne, this genre wasn't just a job. It was sacred territory. He had very specific ideas about how cowboys should be portrayed, how the camera should treat them, how the whole mythology of the Old West should look on screen. So when Eastwood directed and starred in a dark, almost ghostly western in 1973 called High Plains Drifter, where the hero is a vengeful, morally murky stranger and the townsfolk are cowards, Wayne took it personally. He was so bothered that he actually sat down and wrote Eastwood a letter about it, essentially accusing him of disrespecting the real pioneers who settled the frontier. Eastwood, understanding they simply saw the world differently, never bothered writing back. He just kept making the kind of dark, morally complex westerns he wanted to make. Here's the twist, though. Decades later, Eastwood would direct Unforgiven, a film that stripped every last bit of glamour from the gunslinger legend. It won Best Picture. The very style of storytelling Wayne had railed against in an angry handwritten note ended up being crowned a masterpiece. Eastwood didn't just survive Wayne's disapproval. He reshaped the entire genre in his own image. Frank Sinatra. At number 4, we've got someone you wouldn't expect. Frank Sinatra. On paper, these two should have gotten along fine. Both were massive stars. Both eventually leaned conservative. Both were giants of their industry. But in 1960, they nearly threw punches at each other in public. It started when Sinatra hired a screenwriter named Albert Maltz, who happened to be one of the infamous Hollywood 10, writers jailed and blacklisted for refusing to cooperate with anti-communist investigations. Wayne, who was one of the loudest anti-communist voices in the entire industry, saw this as an outright betrayal. When a reporter asked for his reaction, Wayne sarcastically suggested they go ask Sinatra's powerful friend, a young senator named John F. Kennedy, what he thought about hiring communists. In one sentence, Wayne had dragged a future president straight into the middle of it. Things boiled over completely at a Hollywood charity event, where the two men reportedly got right up in each other's faces and nearly threw punches before people pulled them apart. Two of the biggest names in America, ready to brawl in a nightclub over politics. Wayne later downplayed it, claiming nothing happened, but everyone in that room knew better. Under pressure, Sinatra eventually fired Maltz and scrapped the project entirely. Ironically, Sinatra drifted further right in his later years, even campaigning for Ronald Reagan, the same political camp Wayne belonged to. But in the summer of 1960, none of that future friendship mattered. In that moment, Sinatra represented everything Wayne was fighting against. Dennis Hopper. Number 3 is where things get genuinely dangerous. Dennis Hopper, the wild, rebellious face of the counterculture movement. The two of them worked together on a 1965 Western, and the set quickly turned into a battlefield. To Wayne, the long-haired, anti-establishment Hopper embodied everything he believed was rotting America from the inside. Things escalated when a radical activist gave an incendiary speech at the same college Wayne's daughter attended, and Wayne, in a blind rage, decided to pin the blame on Hopper, calling him his personal, in-house radical. According to people who knew Hopper, Wayne actually went looking for him on set carrying a gun, demanding to know where that troublemaker was hiding. Hopper reportedly spent the rest of the afternoon hiding in a closet, waiting for things to cool down. Not long after, Hopper went on to direct Easy Rider, the drug-soaked road film that became the ultimate anthem for the counterculture generation. Wayne called it perverse. Here's what makes this one so strange, though. Wayne had actually helped get Hopper that original job. Hopper had been quietly frozen out of the industry for years due to his self-destructive reputation, and it was partly thanks to Wayne's connections that he landed the role at all. Wayne gave the kid a genuine second chance, and what he got in return, at least in his eyes, was a rebel who symbolized everything he despised. Remarkably, the two of them worked together again a few years later. But Wayne never stopped seeing Hopper as a walking symbol of decay. Jane Fonda. Number 2 isn't about bad movies at all. It's about something Wayne considered outright betrayal of his country. That's Jane Fonda. Wayne was fiercely patriotic. He'd even directed and starred in a film specifically meant to support American troops fighting in Vietnam. To him, backing the soldiers wasn't optional. It was sacred. Fonda did the exact opposite, becoming the most visible anti-war activist in the country. Then in 1972, She traveled to North Vietnam and was photographed sitting on an anti-aircraft gun, the exact kind of weapon used to shoot down American pilots. That single photo exploded across the country and earned her a nickname that followed her for the rest of her life. For someone as fiercely patriotic as Wayne, this crossed a line that felt nearly impossible to forgive. He said publicly that she should be deeply ashamed of herself. Here's the ironic part. Wayne was lifelong friends with Jane's father, the actor Henry Fonda, despite their political differences. But what Jane did overseas was different in his eyes. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a public humiliation of the country and the soldiers he'd spent his career honoring. To her credit, Fonda spent decades afterward expressing real regret over that photo, calling it a devastating mistake that hurt countless soldiers. But that regret came far too late to change Wayne's mind. He never let it go. Marlon Brando. And that brings us to number 1. The man who humiliated Wayne on the biggest stage in the world, and someone the Duke never, ever forgave. That's Marlon Brando. Brando was widely considered the greatest actor of his generation, and politically, he and Wayne were polar opposites. Their rivalry went far beyond one single night, though that night is the one people remember most. Brando represented a whole new style of acting, raw, internal, psychologically driven, that made Wayne's stand tall and deliver your lines approach look outdated by comparison. Old guard versus new, movie star versus artist. Then came the 1973 Academy Awards. Brando had just won Best Actor for his legendary role in The Godfather. He refused to show up and accept it. Instead, he sent a young Native American activist named Sachin Littlefeather up to the stage in his place to deliver a speech protesting Hollywood's long history of mistreating Native American people on screen. Here's why this hit Wayne so hard. His entire career had been built on playing cowboys who fought and killed Native Americans in film after film. This protest wasn't abstract to him. It felt like a direct attack on his legacy. Backstage, he reportedly lost it completely, trying to physically storm the stage to pull Littlefeather off it. It apparently took as many as 6 security guards to hold him back. Afterward, Wayne was bitter and dismissive, sneering that if Brando had something to say, he should have had the guts to say it himself, instead of sending, in his words, some unknown girl dressed up. To Wayne, Brando had used the biggest night in Hollywood to spit on the entire mythology that had made him a star. The protest itself was tied to something very real. At that exact moment, Native American activists were locked in an armed standoff with federal authorities at Wounded Knee, and Brando wanted the world watching the Oscars to actually notice. Sadly, much of that glamorous crowd booed Littlefeather off the stage, and she faced serious backlash and career damage for years afterward. It would take the Academy almost 50 years to formally apologize to her for how she was treated that night. Wayne, for his part, went to his grave still believing that he and Brando had disrespected everything Hollywood used to stand for. So there you have it. 7 people John Wayne was convinced were tearing down the industry he loved. A friend who dared to play a vulnerable character. The face of a gritty new kind of filmmaking. A young star stealing his genre. A man who hired a blacklisted writer. A counterculture rebel. An activist he saw as a traitor to her country. And an actor who used the Oscars to challenge everything he'd built his career on. Here's the hard truth Wayne could never quite accept, though. He lost. The version of Hollywood he was fighting to protect was already fading, and the one he despised so much turned out to be the future. The dark, morally complicated westerns, the gritty character studies, the political protests on live television. All of it went on to be remembered as some of the most important storytelling the medium ever produced. Eastwood became a legend in his own right. Brando is still studied as one of the greatest actors who ever lived. Fonda kept winning awards long after the controversy faded. Wayne passed away in 1979, and the news made headlines across the entire globe. Just weeks before he died, frail and weak, he pulled himself together for one final appearance at the Academy Awards, and the whole room stood and gave him a long, emotional ovation. Hollywood loved him right up to the end, even while quietly moving on without him. And that's really the contradiction that defines him. A towering, undeniable icon of American film, and also a man who spent his final years fighting a culture war he'd already lost, naming enemies one by one while the world kept turning without waiting for him. Even now, decades later, that fight hasn't fully gone away. Some institutions have quietly distanced themselves from his legacy, once his more controversial remarks resurfaced, while other landmarks still proudly carry his name. He's become two very different things to two very different groups of people. A beloved hero to some, a complicated symbol of the past to others. So, which one of these feuds surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into old Hollywood's messiest rivalries, stick around. There's plenty more where this came from.